My name is Rachel Lawson, and on the night of March 14th, 2018, my life changed forever. I had always believed in prayer, or at least I thought I did. Growing up, it was something I did out of routine before meals, at bedtime, and during hard times. But if I'm being honest, my prayers felt empty, like words disappearing into the air. I wondered if God was really listening or if I was just speaking into silence. I worked as a high school counselor, doing my best to guide teenagers who were struggling. Some came from broken homes, some battled depression, and others carried burdens they never spoke about. I cared deeply for them, and I would often whisper prayers for their safety and happiness. But deep down, I felt powerless, like my prayers weren't enough to truly help them. As the world around me seemed to get darker, my faith felt weaker. One night, after an exhausting day, I came home feeling completely drained. I barely had the energy to kick off my shoes before collapsing onto the couch. I told myself I'd rest for just a minute, but as soon as I closed my eyes, a strange dizziness washed over me. My chest tightened, my limbs felt heavy, and panic set in as I realized something was terribly wrong. The room spun, my vision darkened, and fear took over, but just as quickly as it came, everything went completely still. In that stillness, something strange happened. I felt my body give way, like a thread had been cut, and suddenly I was floating. The exhaustion, the pain, the fear, it all vanished in an instant. I felt weightless, as if I had been freed from something I hadn't even realized was holding me down. When I opened my eyes, or whatever sense I had at that moment, I was no longer in my living room. Instead, I was surrounded by a vast, endless space filled with a silence that felt alive. I looked down and saw my own body lying motionless on the couch. It was such a strange feeling, seeing myself from the outside, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. My face was pale, my chest wasn't rising or falling, I wasn't breathing. But somehow I wasn't afraid. I wasn't even panicking. I just existed, separate from the body I had always known as my own. Before I could even begin to process what was happening, I felt something pulling me away from the scene. It wasn't forceful or frightening. It was gentle, almost like an invisible hand guiding me somewhere I was meant to go. As I drifted, the space around me began to change. At first, it was just darkness, a vast nothingness stretching endlessly in every direction. But then, soft waves of light began to appear, slowly moving and pulsing as if they were alive. The light wasn't blinding or harsh, it was warm, comforting, and filled with a peace so overwhelming that it brought tears to my eyes. I had never felt anything like it before. It wrapped around me, not just surrounding me, but filling me completely, as if I was part of it. As I floated within this endless light, I became aware of something else, a presence. It wasn't a figure, not in the way we see people on Earth, but I could feel it. It was powerful, yet gentle, commanding yet full of love. The moment I became aware of it, I felt something deep inside me shift, like every doubt, every fear, every burden I had ever carried was being lifted all at once. I didn't need to ask who or what it was. I just knew. Then, without speaking, the presence communicated something to me, not with words, but with a knowing that resonated deep in my soul. Do not be afraid. The moment I heard it, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over me. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced, beyond human understanding. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't confused. I wasn't even questioning what was happening. It was as if, in that moment, every answer I had ever searched for was right there, just out of reach, waiting to be revealed. Before I could respond, the space around me shifted again. I was no longer floating in the light. Instead, I was standing, or at least I felt like I was, within what seemed to be an endless, glowing space. The air itself felt alive, filled with something pure and powerful. Then, suddenly, images started to appear all around me, playing out like scenes from a movie. But these weren't just random memories. They were moments from my life, moments I had long forgotten, moments I had dismissed as insignificant. I watched as a scene from my childhood unfolded before me. I was kneeling by my bed, hands clasped together, whispering a simple bedtime prayer my mother had taught me. At the time, it had felt small, almost meaningless, just part of a routine. But now, as I watched, I saw something I had never noticed before. Waves of light radiated outward from that prayer, stretching far beyond the walls of my childhood bedroom. It was like ripples in water, spreading further and further, touching places and people I didn't recognize. The presence beside me seemed to sense my thoughts, because without words, I suddenly understood. Every prayer I had ever spoken carried power. Even the ones I thought were small, even the ones whispered absent-mindedly, had created ripples in ways I had never imagined. I had spent so much of my life wondering if my prayers were heard, doubting whether they made any difference at all. But here, in this place, I could see the truth. They had never been wasted. The images changed again, and now I saw a more recent memory. I was at my desk at work, late at night, overwhelmed with exhaustion. A student of mine, a quiet girl named Emily, had broken down earlier that day, confessing that things at home had gotten worse. She hadn't gone into detail, but I could see the pain in her eyes. That night, as I graded papers, I had whispered a small prayer for her. God, please help her. Please let her know she's not alone. It had felt insignificant at the time, like I wasn't doing enough. But now, as I watched, I saw that same wave of light radiating from that moment, surging outward with a strength I never could have imagined. The ripple of light from that prayer stretched far beyond what I could see. It didn't just touch Emily. It reached her home, her family, even people I had never met. I watched as the light wrapped around her, as if protecting her from something unseen. Then, in an instant, the vision shifted, and I saw something I hadn't expected. There were shadows, dark, twisting figures lurking just beyond the edges of the light. They writhed and recoiled, as if the prayer had struck them, forcing them to retreat. I felt a chill run through me. I had never thought much about spiritual warfare before, but now I was seeing it unfold before my very eyes. There was a battle happening, a battle I had never realized I was part of. And my prayers, my small, simple prayers, were weapons against the darkness. The presence beside me spoke again, not in words, but in a knowing that filled my entire being. Your prayers do more than you realize. Even the smallest whisper in faith sends light into the darkness. Tears filled my eyes as I took it all in. Every moment I had doubted, every time I had questioned if my prayers mattered, it had all been a lie. The enemy wanted me to believe that my words were powerless, that my faith was weak. But standing here, seeing the truth for myself, I understood that even the prayers I had whispered in doubt still held power. Even when I had felt like no one was listening, God had been moving, using every prayer to break strongholds I couldn't even see. The visions continued, revealing more moments from my life, times when I had felt too defeated to pray, moments when I had let doubt keep me silent. I saw myself sitting alone in my apartment after a particularly hard day, staring at the ceiling, feeling completely drained. I remembered that night well. I hadn't prayed. I hadn't even tried. But now, in this place, I saw what could have happened if I had. The presence let me see an alternate version of that moment, one where I whispered just a single word, help. It wasn't a long, well-spoken prayer. It wasn't full of scripture or deep theological words. It was just one word, spoken from a place of exhaustion and desperation. But even that single word sent out a ripple of light, just like before. It pushed back the shadows that had surrounded me that night, creating a barrier that the darkness couldn't cross. That moment hit me harder than anything else I had seen. I turned toward the presence, my voice shaking as I asked, "Even that? Even something that small?" And again, without words, I felt the answer resonate deep inside me. Especially that. Prayer was never about saying the right things. It wasn't about sounding perfect or having unwavering faith. It was about turning toward God, even in the smallest way. Even when I felt like my faith was barely hanging on, that small act of reaching out was enough to move mountains. The realization overwhelmed me, and tears streamed down my face. How many times had I let doubt keep me from praying? How many moments had I wasted, believing that my words wouldn't make a difference? I had been tricked into thinking that prayer was only powerful when I felt strong in my faith. But now I understood the truth. Even the weakest prayer spoken in faith carried the power to break chains and push back darkness. The presence beside me didn't condemn me for the times I had failed to pray. There was no judgment, no disappointment, only love. It is not about perfection. The knowing filled me again. It is about persistence. The enemy's greatest weapon wasn't always sin or temptation, it was discouragement. The shadows thrived when people believed their prayers were useless. The moment they stopped praying, the darkness crept in. But the moment they spoke, even the simplest plea for help, the light would break through. The vision shifted again, and now I saw something even more incredible. It was no longer just my prayers I was seeing the prayers of others, all weaving together into something vast and beautiful. Every prayer, every act of kindness, every moment of faith was a thread in a massive, glowing tapestry stretching beyond anything I could comprehend. It wasn't just my prayers that mattered, it was all of them. Every whispered prayer from a mother over her child, every desperate cry from someone in pain, every quiet word spoken in faith, they all wove together into this incredible design. I stood in awe as I gazed at the tapestry, its light shifting and pulsing with life. The threads wove together in ways I couldn't fully understand, creating patterns too vast for my mind to grasp. Some of the threads were mine, moments when I had prayed for a struggling student, for my family, even for strangers I had passed on the street. But the tapestry wasn't just made of my prayers. It stretched endlessly, filled with the prayers of millions of others, each one contributing to something far greater than itself. Suddenly, I felt a shift around me, a pulling sensation like I was being drawn away. The light that had surrounded me started to fade, though the peace I felt remained. I knew what was happening. I was being sent back. A part of me wanted to stay. I had never felt so whole, so loved, so completely understood. But at the same time, I knew I had a purpose to fulfill. I had to return because this truth wasn't just for me. It was for everyone. The pull grew stronger, and before I knew it, the brilliant light faded completely. I felt heavy, like I was being pressed back into something dense and unfamiliar. Then, in an instant, my eyes shot open. I was back. The dim glow of my living room surrounded me, the hum of the refrigerator buzzing softly in the background. My body felt strange, weak, almost foreign, like I had been gone for longer than just a few moments. I took a deep, shaky breath and realized my chest was rising and falling again. I was alive. At first, I just lay there, trying to process everything I had just seen. It felt more real than anything I had ever experienced, yet here I was, back in my ordinary world, as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. I could still feel the weight of what I had learned, the truth that had been revealed to me. I had spent my whole life underestimating the power of prayer, believing it was just words. Now, I knew better. I had seen the battle firsthand. I had seen the light, the darkness, and the way each and every prayer sent ripples into eternity. The days that followed were difficult. I wanted to tell people what had happened, but I didn't know how. How do you explain something like this to someone who hasn't experienced it? At first, I kept it to myself, afraid that no one would believe me. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't stay silent. This wasn't just for me. I had been sent back for a reason. This truth needed to be shared. I started small, opening up to a few close friends. Some listened with wide eyes, hanging on to every word, while others exchanged hesitant glances, unsure of what to say. I could tell that some of them wanted to believe me, but doubt held them back. A few even tried to explain it away. Maybe it was just a dream, a hallucination, my brain reacting to stress. But I knew the difference. What I experienced wasn't something my mind could have made up. It was real. More real than anything I had ever known. The hardest part was sharing it with my church. I thought if anyone would understand, it would be them. But when I finally gathered the courage to speak, I was met with mixed reactions. Some people were moved to tears, saying my testimony gave them hope. Others politely nodded but avoided talking about it afterward. And then there were those who dismissed it entirely. One man, a respected leader in the congregation, pulled me aside and said, "Be careful with stories like this. People might think you're imagining things." His words stung, but they didn't shake me. Despite the skepticism, something incredible started to happen. A woman I barely knew came up to me one Sunday, tears in her eyes. "I've struggled with prayer for years," she said. "Hearing what you went through, it makes me want to try again." Then a coworker, someone who had never spoken about faith before, quietly admitted that he had started praying for his family at night. These moments reminded me why I had been sent back. Even if some didn't believe me, there were others who needed to hear it. As more people came forward, sharing how my testimony had stirred something in them, I realized something important. It didn't matter if everyone believed me. My job wasn't to convince skeptics. My job was to share what I had seen, to let the truth do the work it was meant to do. So I stopped worrying about who would accept it and started speaking boldly. Every conversation, every chance I had, I told people what I had experienced. Prayer is more powerful than we realize. The enemy wants us to think our words don't matter, but that's a lie. Every single prayer sends ripples of light into the darkness. I began to pray differently, not just when I needed something, but all the time. I prayed with confidence, with expectation, knowing that whether I saw the results or not, they were happening. I prayed for my family, for my students, for strangers I passed on the street. And something incredible happened. I started seeing changes. Small at first, but undeniable. Students who had been struggling suddenly found unexpected breakthroughs. Relationships in my life that had been strained for years began to heal. People around me, even those who never prayed before, started asking me questions about faith. And then, one night, something happened that I will never forget. I was grading papers when I felt a sudden urge to pray for a specific student, a boy named Jordan. I didn't know why, but I obeyed. I closed my eyes and simply said, "God, whatever he's facing right now, be with him." The next morning, Jordan came to my office, tears in his eyes. He told me that the night before, he had been in his room, overwhelmed by thoughts of giving up on everything. But then, out of nowhere, a deep sense of peace washed over him. He didn't know where it came from, but he said it was the first time in a long time that he felt hope. That was the moment I knew I would never stop praying again. I don't know why God chose to show me what he did, but I know one thing for sure. I was sent back to tell you this. If you've ever doubted whether your prayers matter, if you've ever wondered if God is really listening, let me be the one to tell you, he is. Every prayer you've spoken, even the ones you thought were too small to matter, have sent ripples into eternity. The enemy wants you to believe that your voice is powerless. Don't let him win. So today, I challenge you, start praying again. Even if it's been years, even if you don't feel anything, even if you don't know what to say, just speak. Just whisper his name. Because no matter how small your prayer may seem, it is a weapon of light, and the darkness cannot stand against it. If this testimony spoke to you, if you've ever felt like your prayers didn't matter, I encourage you to share this video. Someone out there needs to hear this just as much as you did. And if you have your own testimony, drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear how God has moved in your life. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more faith-filled stories. And most importantly, never stop praying. God is listening. He always has been. God bless you all.